Hello, my name is Caroline Grace Fullerton, and I will be presenting over my honors thesis research in psychology. My presentation is titled Mindset, Achievement, Beliefs, and Academic Entitlement, and my thesis advisor is Peter Marks. Can you guys try to be quiet? Thank you. Hello, my name is Caroline Grace Fullerton, and I'll be presenting over my honors thesis research in psychology. My presentation is titled Mindset, Achievement, Beliefs, and Academic Entitlement, and my thesis advisor was Peter Marks. So to start off, I wanted to show you this table that I made for my paper that shows all the different researchers' definitions of academic entitlement. One of the main things I learned at the beginning of my research is that every researcher has a different definition, and that has led to a lot of confusion in this field. So rather than go over all of these definitions, I want to show you what an academically entitled student looks like. An academically entitled student may engage in grade negotiation, which is when a student believes that they have the right to go into a professor's office and negotiate their grade to be higher than what they initially received. An academically entitled student may also be a freeloader, so they may enter a group project believing that they don't need to put in the effort of other students in order to get the same grade as them. Additionally, students high in academic entitlement tend to have unrealistically high expectations of professors, including issues like curving grades. They also tend to believe that they don't need to put in as much effort as other students, and they tend to believe that students should be in control of the classroom and that they shouldn't have to follow rules that they don't agree with. So since every researcher does have a different definition of academic entitlement, they also tend to have different theories about why academic entitlement has developed. So one of the main theories is inflated sense of self, and this originated from the idea that students in America, especially young students, don't have to put in as much effort now as they used to in order to get good grades. And that is called grade inflation. And the idea here is that as students' expectations for how hard they had to work decreased, when they get to college, they tend to have lower expectations of themselves than the professors do. So they tend to think that they don't need to put in as much effort to get an A as the professor thinks they do. However, the issue with this theory is that it tends to assume that students high in academic entitlement would have low self-esteem, but that isn't what research has indicated. Research indicates that students high in academic entitlement have low self-esteem. So researchers developed the ego defense theory, which posits that students are threatened by poor grades. So when they get a poor grade, their self-esteem is hurt, their ego is threatened, and in order to defend themselves, they engage in academically entitled beliefs. So this would explain especially the behavior of, for example, grade negotiation. When a student is threatened by their poor grade, they believe that in order to defend themselves, they need to go negotiate their grade with their professor. The third theory is consumer or customer theory, and this tends to be intertwined with one of the other two theories. And it comes from this idea that universities are getting more and more focused on catering to the student, and they're getting more expensive. And so students tend to focus on their role as a customer more than as a student. And a student high in academic entitlement might believe this phrase, the customer is always right, as the student is always right. They would believe that, since they're a paying customer of the university, they should have some control over the outcome that they receive. So previous research in academic entitlement has found that high honesty predicts low academic entitlement. Additionally, some personality traits that are associated with high academic entitlement are Machiavellianism and narcissism. High academic entitlement is also associated with low self-esteem and low self-efficacy, as well as academic dishonesty. So nothing that we really want. Additionally, there's only been one experimental research design about academic entitlement, and that was Zhu et al. 2019. They manipulated learning theory to see if they could alter the level of academic entitlement of a student. So some students were exposed to the intellectual learning theory and some to the transactional learning theory. The intellectual learning theory emphasized the value of learning, whereas the transactional learning theory emphasized the exchange of goods and services, so the exchange of knowledge for money. And they did find that students in the transactional learning theory group tended to be higher in academic entitlement. So moving on to my next variable of implicit mindset. So one of the confusing things about this variable is that researchers use a lot of different terminology to mean the same things. So if you've heard of mindset theory, fixed growth mindsets, or entity incremental mindsets, those are all the same thing as implicit mindset theory. Additionally, an entity mindset is the same as a fixed mindset, and an incremental mindset is the same as a growth mindset. So what are those mindsets? Well, Carol Dweck was the founder of this theory. She spent decades researching and developing this theory, and she argues that everyone looks at the world in one of two ways. They either are a growth theorist or a fixed theorist. So a growth theorist looks at traits about themselves and about the world as malleable or dynamic, whereas a fixed theorist looks at themselves and the world as unchangeable, as static. So this theory has been applied to a lot of different domains, including morality, empathy, learning, and self-control. Generally, the growth mindset theorists come out on top in all of these domains. They tend to be more empathetic, they tend to have better learning outcomes, they tend to have more self-control. So some of the previous research, in addition to those domains, demonstrates that having a fixed mindset is associated with bad feelings about the self and higher aggressive desires, whereas a growth mindset is related to higher self-affirmation, which is a type of self-esteem, and higher academic achievement. Additionally, having a growth mindset is protective during difficult times. So Blackwell et al. Had a longitudinal design where they tracked students from middle school to high school, and those with a growth mindset were more protected from the difficult experience of transition during that time. Another variable that I looked at was people's beliefs about ability and effort, whether or not they're positively or negatively correlated. If a task requires effort, are you good at it? So does a person believe that putting in effort means that you have a low natural ability, or does it mean that you have a high natural ability? So this has been researched some with mindset, and research indicates that fixed theorists are more likely to believe that ability and effort are inversely related, whereas growth theorists are more likely to believe that exerting effort indicates high ability. Finally, I developed a new variable called perceived ability discrepancy, and the definition is in that first bullet. It is perceived discrepancy between a student's grades and their perceived ability. So students may believe that their grades overestimate their ability, they underestimate their ability, or that their grades are an accurate representation of their ability. This is different from overconfidence because overconfidence implies prediction, whereas perceived ability discrepancy is more about the difference that between feedback and beliefs about ability. Does that feedback match their beliefs about their ability? Does it change their beliefs about their ability? So to connect all of these different variables that we've talked about, AE and mindset have a lot in common. They're both related to negative self-evaluations, to performance goals, to maladaptive reactions to failure, to effort avoidance, and to poor academic performance. We also developed some other variables of interest, including cheating, the ability and effort relationship that I mentioned, and perceived ability discrepancy. So our hypotheses, my first goal was to develop the perceived ability discrepancy scale and demonstrate its validity and reliability. I also believed that fixed mindset and academic entitlement would correlate together and be associated with each other. And I believed that having high PAD would be associated with high academic entitlement. So students that believed that their grades underestimated their ability would be high in academic entitlement, and that relationship would be mediated by mindset. Additionally, I thought that growth mindset would be associated with less cheating acceptance and the belief that effort and ability would vary together, whereas high academic entitlement would be related to more cheating acceptance and effort and ability being inversely related. So my participants were 133 AC undergraduates, 69% were female and 54% were white, so not a super diverse sample. My measures included the PAD scale, which I developed, a measure of test and paper grades, which I'll go over later, a implicit mindset questionnaire, a academic entitlement questionnaire, attitudes towards cheating questionnaire, and effort and ability attributions measure. All of the last four have been used in prior research and have been demonstrated to be reliable and valid. So for the PAD scale, which I created, it was 12 items with 4 in each category of overestimate, underestimate, or accurate. So the first would be my grades overestimate my ability, then my grades underestimate my ability, then my grades are an accurate reflection of my ability. Students rated these on a 6-point Likert scale, and it demonstrated good reliability. The test and paper grade measure was a way to make sure that our PAD scale was valid. And we asked students to think about a recent paper and report the grade that they deserved and the grade that they received. And so the difference between those grades was another way to measure PAD. And then we used that to see if those two measures were correlated. And since they were, that demonstrates that the PAD scale has concurrent validity. Moving on to some of my other results, our initial correlation analyses were somewhat disappointing. We had 2 hypotheses supported, so perceived ability discrepancy and academic entitlement were positively correlated, as I predicted. And people with a growth mindset did believe that ability and effort co-varied, which also supported my hypothesis. Some of our hypotheses were not supported. So mindset and AE were not correlated. Attitudes towards cheating and AE were not correlated. And attitudes towards cheating and mindset were also not correlated. Moving on from this, I wanted to look at AE and mindset in groups rather than on a continuum like we would with correlation. So for academic entitlement, we broke students into high or low academic entitled groups based on tertiles. And we found that students in the high academic entitlement group were higher in perceived ability discrepancy and acceptance of cheating. So those both support our hypotheses. Then moving on to mindset, we broke students into either a growth or fixed mindset group based on cutoffs determined by previous researchers. And from that, we found that students in the fixed group mindset had higher academic entitlement beliefs and believed that effort and ability co-varied and had higher perceived ability discrepancy. So those all supported our hypotheses as well. So as main takeaways, the PAD measure was demonstrated to be reliable and valid, which is very encouraging as it's the first time that it's been used. And this was the first paper in which it was developed. Additionally, AE and mindset are related, such that high AE and fixed mindset are related. Additionally, PAD is related to AE and mindset, as I predicted. So why do this research? This all sounds pretty heady, pretty academic. How does this relate to the real world? Well, PAD, AE, and implicit mindsets all impact student outcomes, as I mentioned. So if we're really focused on improving student outcomes, especially at the collegiate level, this research helps us understand how to do that better. So perceived ability discrepancy may help explain the relationship between high academic entitlement and fixed mindset, And that would be helpful because it may help us develop interventions to decrease AE. Mindset has been manipulated in previous research to change outcomes. And I think that in this case, mindset could be manipulated potentially to alter PAD and AE and improve student outcomes. This study was not without its limitations. So our sample was all AC students, and they were all enrolled in a psych class. Additionally, it was 2/3 growth mindset, so 100 students in the growth mindset group and only 17 in the fixed. That's a pretty homogeneous sample and really doesn't allow for much generalizability. It also could be problematic to have that many students in the growth mindset group, so having a more diverse sample in the future would be beneficial. Additionally, our effort and ability measure demonstrated low reliability, so I would not be super comfortable with asserting those findings with confidence until we're able to replicate the study with a better measure of effort and ability beliefs. Finally, for future directions, where should this research head in the future? I think that it would be really important to replicate this research with a larger and more diverse sample. This would allow for more generalizability and more confidence in our findings. Additionally, I think we need to do some research to demonstrate that PID is in fact distinct from overconfidence. And I think that this area of research within psychology is really lacking in experimental research. And so focusing in the future on experiments manipulating mindset or PAD, I think would be really exciting, especially because that may allow for interventions in colleges that would decrease academic entitlement beliefs and potentially improve student outcomes at those colleges. So that is it. Thank you for watching my presentation. And if you have questions, I believe there's a way to do that now.